Hello, I'm Sharice Mitchell, CEO at the YWCA West Central Michigan, and welcome. We know our YW friends pretty well, so we know that there will be a lot of you logging in just a little bit early today. Our program will begin in a few more minutes, on time at 11 o'clock as promised. But right now, I'm delighted to welcome you to our pre-show. As our community's most comprehensive provider of services for domestic and sexual violence, your support of our work is deeply appreciated. If you donated when you registered or are planning on doing so during the event, there's a link in the chat box. We want you to know that now, perhaps more than ever, those dollars are critical to ensuring that we can be here for more than 4,000 people each year. I want to also offer a special thank you to our sponsors. Mercantile Bank joins us as our title sponsor, and Meyer is sponsoring our keynote speakers today. And our premier and ally sponsors include BDO, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, Crow, Mercy Health St. Mary's, Spectrum Health, and Warner Norcross and Judd. To each of our sponsors, I offer the YWCA's heartfelt thanks. And again, to you, our guests and friends, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Now, let's get started with our pre-show, and I'll be back at 11 a.m. Until then, enjoy.
The people that we see most coming to us for transitional housing or looking for help for housing are individuals who are facing housing as a barrier. You know, when it's someone who is living with an abusive partner and doesn't have housing options, and we're living in a community where affordable housing is just not present, it's just a very difficult situation to navigate. But those are the folks that we're seeing. We've definitely grown in our service areas for transitional housing. We've acquired additional grants that allow us to expand transitional housing and acquire more apartment units. And we've also, over the years, been able to think of other ways to support and help survivors that we hadn't thought of before. For example, there's the Pet Project. Now we're able to house and shelter pets, get them the vaccinations that they need. We internally try to create spaces where staff can have conversations about racism, because there's a lot of misunderstandings or just not understanding. And when we have those conversations, it helps us to understand other people's lived experiences. And that by itself, I feel, is a way that we work towards eliminating racism in a small way. The work that it goes beyond me as a person. It's the whole mission. And, you know, every person has value. When you see somebody acting inappropriately or bullying someone or talking negatively about women or girls and their bodies, that they have a right to speak up, and not only for themselves, but for their friends too. And that's what I feel like the YWCA does.
am a triage specialist for our Advocacy and Resource Services Department. Basically, what I do, I like to call that area like the command center of the department. We run the helpline through there. We have our crisis chat that we will be hopefully launching completely soon. So every call that comes in, we're basically just making sure that we're figuring out what the client needs. I definitely can say from the beginning of when I started working on the Y and where I am now, just in the aspect of opening up that department downstairs, the Advocacy and Resource Services Department, that was a huge evolution. You know, we were able to build everything down there, and the nurse examiner program expanded. I really love my job, and I do it because I know what it's like to go through the things that the people that come to us go through. I was abused at a young age for years, and it doesn't matter how many phone calls that end up in tears or whatever, frustrations. If it just is one person within 100 calls that are unhappy, one person that is like, thank you so much, that is what gives me that drive. It's just helping people. I am hopeful that there is this plan to focus more on anti-racism. I'm really excited about that because that's something that I'm deeply passionate about, and I know that all of the people that I've talked to here are deeply passionate about because that's one of the reasons they came to work for the YWCA. It's ingrained in our mission.
The people that we see most coming to us for transitional housing or looking for help for housing are individuals who are facing housing as a barrier. You know, when it's someone who is living with an abusive partner and doesn't have housing options, and we're living in a community where affordable housing is just not present, it's just a very difficult situation to navigate. But those are the folks that we're seeing. We've definitely grown in our service areas for transitional housing. We've acquired additional grants that allow us to expand transitional housing and acquire more apartment units. And we've also, over the years, been able to think of other ways to support and help survivors that we hadn't thought of before. For example, there's the PET project. Now we're able to house and shelter pets, get them the vaccinations that they need. We internally try to create spaces where staff can have conversations about racism, because there's a lot of misunderstandings or just not understanding. And when we have those conversations, it helps us to understand other people's lived experiences. And that by itself, I feel, is a way that we work towards eliminating racism in a small way. The work that it goes beyond me as a person. It's the whole mission, and every person has value. When you see somebody acting inappropriately or bullying someone or talking negatively about women or girls and their bodies, that they have a right to speak up, and not only for themselves, but for their friends too. And that's what I feel like the YWCA does.
I am a triage specialist for our Advocacy and Resource Services Department. Basically, what I do, I like to call that area like the command center of the department. We run the helpline through there. We have our crisis chat that we will be hopefully launching completely soon. So every call that comes in, we're basically just making sure that we're figuring out what the client needs. I definitely can say from the beginning of when I started working on the Y and where I am now, just in the aspect of opening up that department downstairs at Advocacy and Resource Services Department, that was a huge evolution. You know, we were able to build everything down there, and the nurse examiner program expanded. I really love my job, and I do it because I know what it's like to go through the things that the people that come to us go through. I was abused at a young age for years, and it doesn't matter how many phone calls that end up in tears or whatever, frustrations. If it just is one person within 100 calls that are unhappy, one person that is like, thank you so much, that is what gives me that drive. It's just helping people. I am hopeful that there is this plan to focus more on anti-racism. I'm really excited about that because that's something that I'm deeply passionate about, and I know that all of the people that I've talked to here are deeply passionate about, because that's one of the reasons they came to work for the YWCA. It's ingrained in our mission.
Welcome to Leading, Growing Together. I'm Sharice Mitchell, CEO for the YWCA West Central Michigan, and we are thrilled to be with you today, here in virtual space. In total, there are more than 200 people logged in as we speak across West Michigan. That's 200 people here in support of the YWCA's mission to eliminate racism and empower women and girls, and to raise critical dollars for YWCA services that help more than 4,000 people each year who are experiencing domestic or sexual violence. Hefty topics, to be sure, but with your support, the YWCA has a true impact. So again, thank you and welcome. And as we get started, I want to offer a special thanks to our title sponsor, Mercantile Bank, and our keynote sponsor, Meyer, and to our premier and ally sponsors, BDO, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, Crow, Mercy Health St. Mary's, Spectrum Health, and Warner Norcross and Judd. We often say the YWCA does not do this work alone. Our sponsors are demonstrating what it looks like to work toward the creation of a community that is safe and just for everyone, a community that values women and sees the inherent dignity in every person. We're honored to be partnering with these companies in such a meaningful way. And on that note, it is my pleasure to introduce our title sponsor, Mercantile Bank, and our friend, Lana Wiersma. Lana is the immediate past president of the YWCA's Board of Directors and is Senior Vice President and Human Resource Director for Mercantile Bank. With 43 locations and $4.7 billion in assets, Mercantile is one of Michigan's largest banks, and it calls Grand Rapids home. Mercantile has dedicated itself to improving lives, and its philanthropic culture reflects this. They have a steadfast belief in being a strong supporter of the diverse communities they serve, and their pledge is to work in partnership with those communities for an even brighter future.
Sharice, thank you. It is an honor to be the title sponsor, and on behalf of Mercantile, I want to welcome and thank everyone who is watching today for joining us. At Mercantile, we believe embracing human diversity makes us a better bank. We know it makes us a better people. The collective sum of our employees' individual differences, life experiences, self-expression, inventiveness, and talent represent an intrinsic and valued part of our culture. Creating an inclusive, welcoming environment, respecting the dignity and humanity of our employees and customers, these are important to Mercantile, not solely because they're good business. They are important because they are the right thing to do. Our commitment extends to our community as well. It is clear that empowered women are key to our community's well-being and success. As the pandemic limited our team's ability for community involvement in many ways, we still saw incredible efforts by our staff to serve, reaching a total of 12,420 hours for 523 nonprofit organizations in 2020. If the last year and a half has taught us anything, it's that we can make giant leaps towards a more inclusive community. There's an opportunity for meaningful change. There is recognition that racism and sexism and the culture of domestic and sexual violence they feel are issues that belong to each of us. People like you who are watching today see that and want to be a part of making our world better. Mercantile Bank applauds YWCA for bringing us all together today. We know the incredible importance of the YWCA to this community. We are also very aware of the important donations are to ensuring the YWCA can continue moving our community forward. In financial circles, we often talk about value, and the YWCA is one of the community's most valuable organizations. For 121 years, they've been improving the lives of women. That's quite a track record and one worthy of your investment. We have $20,000 to raise today, so I'm inviting everyone in our audience to please consider joining me by making a gift this morning. We've tried to make this as easy as possible, and you'll see on your screen a couple ways to give online. You can click directly on the donate button that's on your screen. In addition, you should be able to see the URL for the YWCA's donation page. Just type ywmi.org/give into a new browser window. Now I'll turn things over back to Sharice. Enjoy the rest of the program, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lana. Leading, Growing Together is a new event for the YWCA. Traditionally, our fundraising events have highlighted what our organization is best known for: strong, expert, best-in-practice services which address domestic and dating abuse, sexual assault, and child sexual abuse. And during the pandemic, we have seen an incredible need. Last fall, as the pandemic safety measures began to ease, calls to our 24-hour helpline doubled, and things have not slowed down. Our advocacy services, things like legal assistance, crisis counseling, and safety planning, are at 131% of where they were at this time last year. Since January, in total, our nurse examiners have performed almost 300 sexual assault medical forensic exams. In July alone, they cared for 52 victims. And so I have to tell you, I could not be more proud of the YWCA staff. They have been here through it all since the beginning, and they have not wavered. Services have continued safely and uninterrupted, so survivors could be assured that they could find help when and where they needed it. We have been in this community for 121 years. We have been here throughout the pandemic for survivors, and we will continue to be here. Support like yours makes that possible. The gifts you give today help in truly meaningful ways. At the same time, it is helpful to realize that domestic and sexual violence are symptoms of much deeper issues. They are the consequences of racism and sexism. Last year, the YWCA celebrated our 120th anniversary, and for generations, we have evolved within this vibrant community. We are connected to a broad network of local partners and supporters. We are rooted in a rich history filled with stories of women working together to improve the lives of all women. And our future is brightened by the promise of our mission. All of this speaks to the power of relationships. Relationships are the first step in changing our world for the better. In order to empower all women, we must confront racism at the same time. Our goal today is for you to leave inspired, not daunted, equipped, not overwhelmed by the idea of anti-racism work. In just a bit, we'll welcome our speakers, Denise Hamilton and Jenna Arnold, two women who are self-described disruptors. They are professional colleagues, personal friends, and do a beautiful job demonstrating how progress in anti-racism is fundamentally about relationships. But first, we're going to introduce you to a group of women who hold a special place in our hearts. The saying goes, well-behaved women rarely make history. In 1970, a local group of women who insisted on pushing against conventional thinking were instrumental in getting the YWCAs across the country, one of the oldest, largest women's organizations in the country, and one led primarily by white middle-class women, to radically elevate anti-racism work. The outcome of their efforts was dramatic. At the national level, significant numbers of women of color moved into leadership positions. Audits were conducted across the country to ensure associations were moving forward, and programming shifted to more appropriately support the diverse needs of all women. YWCA has a unique history and evolution as a social justice organization. At the heart of it is we are an organization that was founded by, for, and about women. And we are so proud of that really strong feminist root and that commitment to social justice and the voice and the role that women play in changing the world. We are incredibly proud of saying we are a part of a history that starts with an individual, their rights, their individuality, their value, their human dignity, and starting from there makes all of the work that we do in social justice that much more powerful. I wasn't born when the One Imperative was issued, but I believe it today, and I live it today. And that is something that can be passed on in so many different spaces. And we have seen examples of how that One Imperative actually led to real change in some powerful ways.
I think at that time there was a transition in the Y from being a sort of staid, mostly white women's organization. And there was all this ferment going on in society and people wanting to be involved. I mean, some people wanted to flee from the changes that were happening, but there were others who were looking for opportunities to do that. There was I think also the inkling of the women's movement, and that was the right place to be. You either had to put on blinders or you could see what was happening in society. Make your choice. I chose to be active and try to do things. And I think by being involved with the Y, I also knew some people who were longtime activists. I think the women's movement happened and women's consciousness rose.
One of the founding mothers that we are kind of most proud of at the YWCA is Mrs. Helen Claytor. Such a matriarch for the organization, not just here in Grand Rapids as the first African-American board president of a local YWCA, but she was also in that space at YWCA USA, leading the charge as a chair, as a champion for all that the YWCA stands for.
I actually think that my mother's participation in the One Imperative was a lifelong process for her. The way it was expressed in my mother's life after she graduated was through her work, and a lot of her work was with the YWCA. She was offered a job in New York around that time, and she went to the national YWCA headquarters and began working in what later became their race relations department, which she founded. I think the One Imperative was very important then, it was important before then, and it's important well after.
I became involved because the National YWCA had said prior to our conference that they wanted local Ys to get young women involved. I had to help find and recruit them, and did so. And once that I started talking to them about the Y and the things that we should be doing that we wasn't doing, they got really involved and wanted to become a part of it. There were women from every state, basically, that was there. There was over 500 of us, Black women, who attended the conference. When the program manager was presenting the One Imperative, it was like you could hear a pin drop on the floor. When it was read and the motion was made and there was a second, well, then the conference floor went crazy.
I just remember watching Helen Claytor's face, having to listen to a parade of women saying, "Don't do this." And I just remember getting up, waiting in that line. And when I got to the front of the line, I called the question. I said, let's just vote. Let's just vote and see. It was a mix of being very still and people being very happy.
I can feel it now. I don't know how else I can say it. It was just so emotional.
Women's roles in racial justice are all. I don't know that there is one to identify. Wherever people come together To make change, women should be there. And in the area of racial justice, it is as allies, as accomplices, as activists, as supporters.
If we are all going to be successful, we need every brain and every head, every finger we can get to work together to create the kind of diversity that is needed for this country, because it takes all of us to run this country. The one imperative is this country.
Yes, it might make people uncomfortable, but we got to do it. And I think we can. I think we need leadership to do it, so lead on. Why?
The time is now. Today is the day. The future is female. Whatever quote that you want to use, today we have an opportunity to stand in that space to honor the work that Mrs. Claytor and so many others. We owe it to them to say we've taken on that mantle. We are not standing on your shoulders, we are actually lifting you up and standing underneath the work that you've done to carry that forward. And today we get to do that. I'm joined by two women for whom I have tremendous personal respect and love, and that many of you who are watching today may already know. They've been fixtures in our community for years. Each also has a list of achievements and community involvement that is a mile long. But to quickly summarize why they're with us today, Jackie Taylor is a longtime YWCA friend and a teacher at heart. She has spent a lifetime reshaping spaces so we can better learn from one another and build a more equitable community. In higher education, she broke down gender barriers and created opportunity for women and people of color. As a volunteer, she has been deeply involved with countless organizations that do the same, such as ensuring access to funding for excluded entrepreneurs and providing microloans to women-owned businesses. Like Jackie, Ellen James has a special commitment to educational equity. She won 4 countywide elections to the Grand Rapids Community College Board of Trustees, was a founding member, the first female chairperson, and served for 25 years. Ellen was also a YWCA board member in the 1970s and part of that trailblazing group of 500 Black women who drafted and lobbied for the One Imperative. She spent much of her career with the City of Grand Rapids Equal Opportunity Department and has volunteered for decades with organizations focused on racial equity. Jackie and Ellen, thank you. The story of the YWCA's One Imperative is not a perfect one. A lot of progress was made, but many local associations disaffiliated. Others were half-hearted in their efforts. Energy and attention waned. I think there are lessons that we can learn in terms of how to work together and how to sustain that energy momentum. So I'm going to start with the same question for the both of you. How do you go about building relationships with people who are very different from you? And I'll ask Jackie if you could start.
First of all, I truly love people. I care about people. I care about their future. And I want to learn every single thing that I can about each individual so that I can understand their dreams, their hopes, what they hope to achieve, what they really feel about life, how we can work together to encourage and change and build together for the future. How joining together and sharing each of those areas where we connect will build more connections and will build more openings and will build more opportunities. So that's my heart.
Beautiful. And thank you for sharing your heart in so many different ways. You are a model for building relationships and connections. We so appreciate that. Ellen, how about you?
First of all, let me say I was one of those very fortunate people. I didn't have to look for a place. A place was found for me. And actually, in my first encounter with the community, because I'm just very much church-based, my first encounter with the community was through the YWCA. I volunteered maybe 1 hour every 2 weeks in a gift shop that we had at the YW. So my mentor encouraged me, I had a mentor who encouraged me to be involved. So that was how I really started to become active in the community. But I would say to those persons, particularly women, we're not counting you in, men, but we're talking specifically to women. If you have no idea of what you want to do, let me first of all suggest that you become involved with the YWCA, because they are the leaders, in my opinion, in this community for women. They're doing some very outstanding things. Also, I ask you to move away from your comfort zone. And we all have comfort zones. We will not go to something because they are uncomfortable. I can give you a good example. Church. Have you ever been to another church? This is just an example. Have you ever been to an affair that you were the only one there? These are the things that are important to me. And I know people think that it's not, I don't want to go because I'm uncomfortable, but I'm going to ask you again to get out of that comfort zone and take that step. I have done it a number of times, and now I consider myself pretty good at doing it.
Thank you so much. So stepping outside of our comfort zone, being connected to one another, and taking a chance. Thank you so much. So one question for the both of you in your experience and your time here, and as we sit in this precipice of moving things forward today as women, my question is, what role can women be playing today in creating equity?
Wow.
That's what you're starting with.
Yeah, Jackie, that would be great.
There's just a whole world out there to connect with. And as we connect and as we grow, I've had people who have mentored me over the years. Hortense Kennedy, who headed the National Delta Sigma Thetas, was a mentor of mine. We worked together over the years. Back in the 80s, I worked across the nation with women to ensure that there were pathways for women to grow into college presidents. 3% of women at that time were college presidents. It's now up in the 26 or 27%. It's still too low, but how do we really support each other? How do we open those gateways? How do we ensure that no matter the background we have the opportunities to grow, to build, to create together? So we build it together, not separately. The opportunities to know the Henry Louis Gates Juniors of the world who have helped us change the world, we brought them in so students could learn from them. We opened those doors to learning. We really, really care. And Ellen and I have worked together for years to open those doors and change policies.
Beautiful. So Ellen, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I will continue to be involved in this process. And I have for over 50 years. Wow. Didn't realize it had been that long. But what is important to me is that we continue to work together. We're talking about two issues that affect our lives very strongly, and that is racism and sexism. And it's not going away. In my opinion, it's really on the back burner, in my opinion, right now. So I think that we have to continue to work together. Again, I want to tie my first question in terms of getting out of our comfort zone, getting out of our comfort zone, doing something that we haven't done before. And I just want to encourage again, particularly our women, that I'm as a black woman, I'm faced with racism and I'm faced with sexism. Okay, and white women are faced with sexism. We have to be together. We have to work together to make that happen. Now, it goes a lot further, as I said, just from us getting together. We have to go that other step. White males are the key. And I've said to you several times, Sharif, I think one of the things that has to happen is that as we work, we have to bring our white brothers in. They have to know. And I say to my white friends, you're the last person that's going to he's going to hear your voice. Your voice is going to be the last voice he's going to hear at night. So you make sure you're whispering in his ear those things that are important. And I want to say also that I have a number of friends who started out in the struggle. They're still in the struggle. But what was important for me was to see how their husbands progressed or their friends progressed and also became involved in the movement. So that was just very, very important to me. And I also, the person that really got me started, and I always want to say this because as I talk to other people, and I get calls on the phone, and they're saying to me, what can I do? What can I do? And I'm always giving them something to do. But the person that I really admire for getting me started in this community was Bobby Butler. And she was very instrumental in our why, and I thank her today for what she has done for not just for me, but for other women in the community. And I am so happy to continue to work with Jackie. We hooked up. I can't remember how we met each other, but we hooked up and we just came together because we were interested in the same things, and that is moving the women's agenda forward. So I would encourage women that are listening today, if you will just start working on one thing, you might think it's insignificant, but it is very, very important.
Thank you both so much. We stand in this space because you two came together, and I so appreciate the path that you have laid for us. Wonderful people. Thank you both.
And if you will
Please.
allow me
Go ahead.
just a moment, I would like to make an appeal on behalf of the YWCA. Thank you for the work that you're doing, continue to do in our community, and I have seen such growth. And the things that you're doing, a lot of us really don't even want to know. But I know today we have a fundraiser, and our goal is $20,000. So I am just asking those that are listening today, if you will please make a hearty contribution. Now you're probably asking, have you made your contribution? I have indeed, and I would encourage each of you to do that. Thank you, Sheree.
Thank you both
I would
so much.
say, listen to Ellen. I just wrote my check to make sure she's on target on there. It really is important to invest in the future. Diversity and inclusion are not just words, they're missions.
Thank you both so much. We so appreciate your commitment, your energy, and what you bring to this organization, to this community. I'm proud to sit here and stand with you. I appreciate the time and energy that Bobby Butler and all of our friends and sisters have committed, and thank you all for being here. So now we get to meet our keynote speakers, Jenna Arnold and Denise Hamilton. We're deeply appreciative to Meyer for their partnership as today's keynote sponsor. The YWCA and Meyer share a similar rootedness to our community that comes from being a part of one for so very long. The number and depth of their partnerships are evidence to their commitment to home. While hunger relief is one of their longest-standing philanthropic commitments, Meyer is part of countless community partnerships that range from health and wellness to community celebrations to cultural institutions and so much more. Meyer's commitment to diversity and inclusion is something that is central to the well-being of a community, is what brings them here today. Representing Meyer is Cindy Rogowski, Vice President for the YWCA Board of Directors and an Associate General Counsel at Meyer. And she has the honor of introducing Jenna and Denise.
Hello, I'm Cindy Rogowski, an Associate General Counsel with Meyer and Vice President of the YWCA Board of Directors. Meyer is honored to partner with the YWCA in such a meaningful way on topics that matter so greatly to our community and to our organization. Meyer is dedicated to enriching lives in the communities we serve, and fulfilling this goal begins with a focus on serving people in the workplace, in our stores, and in our communities. We honor the characteristics, traits, and experiences that make each person unique, and are committed to creating environments that make all people feel welcome, supported, valued, and meaningfully engaged. Meyer shares the YWCA's belief in the dignity and value of each person. Without question, we are living in uncertain times, but uncertainty can also encourage us to think differently, and that creates opportunity and hope. Anti-racism work is not easy, but it is required. In the midst of so much uncertainty, we have been given the chance, individually and collectively, to move our community forward in ways that improve life for everyone. To that end, it is my pleasure to formally welcome our speakers, Denise Hamilton and Jenna Arnold. Denise is a nationally recognized inclusion strategist and the founder of Watch Her Work, a digital platform for professional women. Denise has been called the secret weapon of CEOs because her unique superpower is the ability to have challenging discussions and come out the other side with solutions and a positive direction. Denise has been featured in Harvard Business Review and Newsweek, and on numerous other outlets, such as Bloomberg TV, CBS, NBC, and MSNBC. Jenna is a global educator, activist, entrepreneur, and author of Raising Our Hands: How White Women Can Stop Avoiding Hard Conversations, Start Accepting Responsibility, and Find Our Place on the New Front Lines. She was named one of Inc.'s 20 Most Disruptive Innovators and earned a spot on Oprah's list of 100 awakened leaders who are using their voices and talent to elevate humanity. She's a frequent contributor to CNN, MSNBC, and Fox. We were first introduced to Denise and Jenna in the summer of 2020 when they spoke at an online event hosted by the YWCA of Greenwich titled Beyond Petitions and Protests. Their approach is a mix of personal experience, professional expertise, and a pragmatic understanding of what it takes to walk in solidarity with one another. Jenna and Denise, welcome.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you so much for having us. I know I can speak on behalf of Denise that it is such an honor to be on this stage, though virtual, specifically following Ellen and Jackie. My life goal is to be just like them when we grow up. Denise and Charisse, I loved that scarf, and I'm going to need to get the link to get one myself. It is a time, it is a minute on this page in our history, and so much of the content that you shared leading up to this conversation, it is an ever-evolving conversation and work. And one of the subjects and challenges that Denise and I are laser focused on and are planning on speaking to is how we maintain that stamina. Because as we heard, the history of YWCA has been at this for many decades. And as we all have witnessed, there has been a new type of seeing. I would hesitate to use the word reckoning, but a new level of visibility into some of the truths of so many people around this country and around this world in the past year and a half that has posed a new level of questioning, particularly among the white communities throughout the country. And one of our concerns, my concern, is how we make sure that people are remaining steadfast on the front line. And as Denise and I did a lot of work and conversations like this in the days after George Floyd's murder, a scene that is the longest rerun in this country's history. I kept thinking to myself, wow, is now a moment where we can collectively inch forward, or dare I say, leap forward. And one of the very knee-jerk responses to our Americanized capitalistic way of solving problems, this desperation to look for a book or a podcast or a conference to participate in, to suddenly eliminate racism or xenophobia or biases in general. I was enthusiastic to see so many new curious folks come to this conversation. In particular, I had a lot of white men in my life. To Ellen's point about how are we going to bring white men into this work, using terms like patriarchy and white supremacy, reparations in ways that they wouldn't have weeks, months before. And Denise had posed a question or a little bit of a bet to me and said, I bet 40% of the people who are here now, of the people who are in the streets now, are going to go back into the woodwork. And I said, no, people are going to stay. They're seeing people are going to stay. And I am now, a year and a half later, feeling like it's more like 80 or 89% of folks have moved back into that woodwork, into the corners, revisiting their list on Netflix that they need to watch outside of having the hard conversations and asking the hard questions of themselves. And therein lies the problem, is how are we in this moment in time going to unstuck ourselves and do the stamina-based work that it's going to take to carry the mission of YWCA forward, and increase equity and justice for all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's been a hard lesson, right? We don't really know what stamina looks like. I was so blown away hearing the stories of these conversations happening in 1970. Like, this is how long we have been doing this work, and there have been so many people who are steadfast and who have been chipping away. And that's what stamina looks like, right? It's a daily, weekly, annually committed work. And let's be honest, we are a people that want a 10-second solution for a 10-generation problem. And that's just not the way the world works. I think that we thought that we could come in and redecorate, not realizing that we need a deep remodel. We need to pull up some things, tear down some things, remove, pull it up, and look at the ugliness. And let's be honest, that is tiring work. It's tiring. It's hard. It's hard to lose our stories. Even if our stories aren't true, they're ours, and we love them. And a lot of what we've seen over the last year and a half has been an unearthing and a dismantling of broken stories. And when you have guilt or grief around those broken stories, you can have a myriad of responses. And unfortunately, some people become defensive. Some people spiral into guilt and shame, but some people get to work, right? And that's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about how you get to work. And one of the things that I think is really important is to understand that there is a need that we have. It's a desperate, urgent need to figure out what the story is. What is our truth? I call this the great renegotiation. We have more information, more access to information than we've ever had in our entire lives, in the history of man. And so as we're here contemplating what the future looks like, as we get new data and new stories every day, do we have the ability to integrate it into our story? Very often I am working with clients, and I specialize in organizations that are very conservative, early to DEI. I work in the blue ocean space. And very often there is this issue of the fear that I'm asking them to give up their story. And I'm really not. Maybe your story is Andy Griffith. You know, that's what a police officer is. They help you. They help you get to resolve the conflict by the end of the episode. Your image is the heroes running into the towers at 9/11. Those stories are 100% true. But the challenge that we have is that we have to expand that story to allow for a broader truth, right? I'm not asking you to give up your story, give up your experience of when you were a kid, if you got in trouble and the cops picked you up, they took you home to your parents with a harsh talking to. There are people who are walking to the movies with a girl on a date and they get stopped and frisked, thrown up against the wall, and quite frankly, terrorized. Just because that's not your experience doesn't mean it's not a experience, right? That somebody's having that. And the best example I can give to you for that is BlackBerry. There was a time when everybody had a BlackBerry. Their story was that they were number one. They were the dominant producer in the market. Nobody was even close. They were making millions of dollars. That story was 100% true. But when they heard other stories, hey, somebody's going to want this for personal use. No. People, this is a work tool. Somebody's going to want to send pictures. No, we're not going to have frivolous use of this advice. Well, maybe even someday video. No, that's going to take too much bandwidth. Nobody's ever going to want to do that. Their story was true, but their inability to open up, to listen and process other stories and incorporate it into a larger story rendered them almost extinct. Does anybody in this audience have a BlackBerry right now? Probably not, right? So this idea of what it takes to be unstuck is it takes deep listening. It takes disassociating ourselves, disconnecting ourselves, removing our obsession with our own story, and opening it up to hear and process and experience what other people are experiencing. The other thing is, the problem that we had in this issue is we didn't make it our problem. We still talk about this work of inclusion, of eliminating racism as charitable work, as if it is not central to the survival of our country, as if it is not central to the survival of us as humans and how we work together. This is not a nice problem to help with. This is central. This is us. It's our problem. And when you own it, you move differently, right? Renters decorate, but owners remodel. Owners repair. Owners fix. And that's the position that we really have to find ourselves in.
And one of my big takeaways for when I was doing research for my book, Denise, I was crisscrossing the country having closed door conversations with American women, uncovering or asking the existential questions about identity and participation and civic responsibility. I was struggling to understand why everybody wasn't like Jackie and Ellen and why everybody wasn't involved in their local YWCA when it seems so fundamental to the survival of our species. And what I kept hearing was a lot of folks are so committed to those stories, and the way that they stay loyal to them is by chasing some low-grade version of perfection. That the American narrative, going back to Andy Griffith and running into Twin Towers, or these myths that America has created to keep itself glued together in problematic and in some ways, graceful ways, is very much what I like to describe as a very filtered Instagram feed. So for those of you who are on social media and you see folks, particularly the younger generation, who are very savvy on the apps, certainly not BlackBerry, that was a great analogy, Denise. But they filter their photos and they make themselves skinnier, and they, they erase all of the blemishes. This idea that we have a very sterilized version of what we want the story of this country to be, which results in us teaching what we did to the indigenous communities in second grade as a national state standard. It requires that we talk about enslavement in fourth grade as a national state standard. And then middle and high school is dedicated to the world wars and the industrial era. And of course, if we're talking about some of the most complicated, horrific parts of our history in elementary school, the boundaries of which you can actually explore those narratives and those truths are very narrow. And so we have constructed different spaces, be it country clubs, be it history books, be it the excuses we make for our sons, that allow us to navigate and perform this level of perfection. And in addition to that, again, when I think of how I have designed my life, it has been very much against what I thought was this collective blueprint and this checklist that I had to check off, from good grades to being sporty and having friends and arts and crafts and going to undergrad, and certainly finding a partner pretty quickly during undergrad or thereafter, and then getting engaged, and then spending a while planning the wedding and talking about the wedding. And then as soon as the last wedding gift is opened, the immediate conversation shifts to children. And then the most privileged question that I believe humans on the planet, American women in particular, get asked is, are you going to continue to work or stay at home? And now I'm not interested in the mommy wars. Leave those in the 90s where they belong. But this idea that we don't collectively require more from each other than checking off all of the to-do list. So here we are, as we chase perfection. We try to perform what it is that we want the world to see about us. It doesn't give us a lot of bandwidth to see the truths about so many other folks, particularly those that organizations like YWCA serve. And it also doesn't allow us to do what I believe is one of the most important exercises of our time, is to sit in a place of confusion, is to ask the hard questions, to embrace the not knowing of what to do next. Because of course, when I set out to write this book, and in the words of Toni Morrison, write the books you need to read, I needed to understand how my history and my lived experience of a white woman being raised in the suburbs of Philadelphia designed and dictated how I see the world. That when I wrote the book, I wanted to get to chapter 10 and be like, and here are the 25 things that you can do to be an ally, an advocate, an accomplice. And by the time I got to chapter 10, I was twiddling my thumbs. Like, I have no idea what the actual next step turnkey is. And I think that's really where the opportunity to be human is to listen better, to ask harder questions, to sit in a place of, oh, I actually don't know the answer to this. Let me lean back and watch. And not because the answer isn't going to surface or it's ever evolving, but it's this constant gardening of work. And it's why I'm so grateful to be in a relationship with a teacher and a friend, an incredibly wise human being like Denise.
Oh, you're so sweet. You are so sweet. I love what you said, because I think that one of the challenges that we have at this moment is this notion of we have to choose worlds. We have to choose truths. Are you right? And do I have to become like you? Or am I right? And do you have to become like me? Are we villains or are we heroes? Are we saints or are we sinners? And I think we're renegotiating that, and we're struggling. We're really struggling. When we think about George Washington, we want to think of him as a leader and a hero and amazing. We don't really want to hear that his dentures were made from teeth he pulled from slaves. We don't want to hear that he gave his slaves one set of clothing per year. Per year. People that worked in the fields. Like, we don't even want to know those details. We prefer the lies that we were told as children. I don't even know if you ever heard, his teeth were made of wood. I don't even know why they told us that. Like, we have all of these stories in our head. And so when someone comes along and says, wait, that story's not true, or wait, this story, there's more to the story, we get very protective of our heroes. We get very protective of our reality. And we are able to put this veneer of reasonability on it. And we have to be so very careful, so careful, because our politeness kicks in. When I say a veneer of reasonability, I mean that we find a way to gloss over things and look away. And what I hear you talking about, Jenna, and what I think you learned in your journey while you worked on the book, is that we were socialized. We've been raised to look away. You're sitting at the pool and you're reading a book, and in your periphery, and just almost out of earshot, you hear somebody walk up to the Black couple next to you and say, do y'all belong here? Do you live in this neighborhood? Do you have a permit to be here? And what do? I mean, let's be honest. Do you just act like you didn't hear and read your book a little bit more? Or do you turn and say, that is a really inappropriate question. That's not your business. Please leave these people alone and stop harassing them. That's where we are. That's the choice. Are we going to step out of our comfort zone? Are we going to choose to examine the 5 feet around us? And when I say the 5 feet around us, I don't need you to be an expert in reparations. I really don't. I don't need you to be an expert in closing the digital divide and how are tech companies going to reconcile the access. I don't need you to solve all those big problems. I need you to solve the 5 feet that are in your grasp, that are in your reach, right? I need you to look around and see the places. Does your company have any minority interns? Have you ever had a minority mentor? Not an assistant, not a secretary, not an intern, but a mentor. Do you put yourself in position to learn from people that are different than you, not just to teach? Because we love to teach, right? We love to be kind and generous and charitable. But are you really ready to be equitable? Right? That's a little bit different. That's a little bit different. Am I ready to manage my anger? Sometimes as a Black person in America, if I think about it too long, I'll be angry all the time. One of the challenges I have to do if I'm going to be in relationship with amazing friends like Jenna is I have to manage my anger. But I also ask her to manage her tears, right? Because I don't have the bandwidth to manage your guilt and shame and inaction. We need to build something together. We need to co-create and reimagine something together, right? And I don't have time for us to be steeped in niceties. It's okay to say, stop doing that. That is inappropriate. To speak up when something is going in a way that is not the right thing to do. I remember when I was working in commercial real estate, and I was the only Black person that they had ever had in the industry. Commercial real estate is 0.5% any ethnic minority at the time that I worked in it. And one of the EVPs came out and asked all of the white guys around me to lunch and left me sitting there. And I remember that as they were leaving, one of the guys turned around and looked at me. He knew it was wrong. He knew it was cruel. He knew it was mean. And I could see him wanting to say something. I could feel it. And I can tell you the harm and the hurt of that EVP not inviting me was totally eclipsed by the harm of that guy who knew what the right thing was and didn't do it. Y'all, we need some beautiful bystanders. We need some people that will speak up, that will say what needs to be said, and not be afraid of conflict. Conflict won't kill us, but politeness will. Fear will. Inaction will.
And in the last moments, I would add the idea that specificity matters. I've found that part of the challenge that well-intended American white women get into is that they're asked to provide their opinions around bias or around guns or reproductive rights. And it can be an overwhelming subject broadly. But when it comes to very specific moments, like, is everybody in the room invited to lunch? There's a level of, I don't have to take a stand or make a decision and figure out if I'm an ally, advocate, accomplice, etc., on this scale of what does activism look like today. It's what's happening in the real moment and how nuances in your 5 feet of peripheral can change the lives of folks, which is, I feel like I'm probably speaking to the choir here at YWCA. But in an effort to find a couple of key takeaways, maybe for folks to write down in a notebook, is that I have found a tremendous amount of freedom and humility in not knowing and asking for clarification. I'm raised in a country that tells me that I either know the answer or I don't. And if I don't, I'm doing something wrong. And I have loved and found a lot of relief in asking clarifying questions of Denise and being willing to relearn and to hear new stories that might contradict the one that I've been promised to myself. Dee, I don't know if you have any additional final thoughts in this last minute.
I do. We can do hard things, guys. We can do hard things. We are a group of people that sent somebody to the moon with computers that are not as sophisticated as the phones we have in our pockets right now. We can do hard, difficult things. We are strong and powerful. And if we just commit to being that beautiful bystander, if we just focus on the 5 feet around us, looking for opportunities to change, finding new vendors, hiring different people, interviewing, recruiting at different schools. There's so many spaces that we can make change, but we have to make the change here, not down the street. We have to stop othering this conversation. But if it's just like a stadium, if everybody drops a piece of paper, it's filthy. But if everybody bends down and picks one up, wow. So we need you to bend down and pick it up. Every single person to take up the gauntlet for your responsibility to make that change. That's the only way it's really going to happen.
Jenna and Denise, I could sit and listen to you two all day. You talk about remodeling. I would watch your home improvement show, your world improvement show any day. You have an audience here.
Give us the Constitution, Charisse. Just we'll start with the Constitution.
That sounds perfect. Thank you. Yeah, you all are absolutely fabulous. And Denise, I love the analogy of the BlackBerry. Believe it or not, I have a BlackBerry in my junk drawer. I think it's probably time for me to toss that out. I may do that.
Good artifact.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. It has been a gift and a pleasure, and seeing the relationship that you've built together to change the world means so much. I hope that the community reads your books, pays attention to what you have to say, and builds the kind of relationship that you have built with one another. Thank you for being a part of our day together today. Wonderful. Thank you so much. It has been a wonderful afternoon and an opportunity for us to engage. So I invite people to continue to have their own conversations, their own chats. I don't know if we have time for more Q&A or if we are ready to connect to the next level of work, but thank you both so much. I'll be sending you your own YWCA scarves. We want you all hooked up and geared up too. Thank you so much both for being here. So before, before we say goodbye to all of you today, I want to again thank our title sponsor, Mercantile Bank, our keynote sponsor, Meijer, and our ally and premier sponsors. And a very special thank you to all of you, our early contributors, to everyone who has been donating online, and all of you who have been watching and chatting with us today. We mentioned at the beginning of our program that our goal was to leave you inspired and equipped, and I certainly hope we've done that. I hope the biggest takeaway is that working together is how we will succeed in relationship with one another. And now we'll leave you with a promise and a pledge from the YWCA staff. Thank you all so very much for joining us, for your generosity, for your support to the YWCA's work to care for survivors, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Mindful of the continuing affliction of systemic, interpersonal, and internalized racism, including racial, ethnic, religious, gender, and other forms of bias, prejudice, and bigotry in my own life, my family, my circle of friends, my coworkers, and the society in which I live, with conviction and hope.
I pledge.
I take this pledge fully aware that the struggle to overcome and eliminate racism will not end with a mere pledge, but calls for an ongoing transformation within myself and society.
I pledge
to look deeply and continuously in my heart and in my mind to identify all signs and vestiges of racism.
To rebuke the use of racist language and behavior towards others born of such racism.
To root out such racism in my daily life and encounters with persons I know and with strangers I do not know.
And to expand my consciousness to be more aware and sensitive to my use of overt and subtle expressions of racism and racial stereotypes.
I pledge
to challenge any expressions of racism and racial stereotypes in my presence by my family, my children, my friends, my coworkers, and those I encounter.
To actively object to the display of visible and invisible racism and the use of racial stereotypes and exclusionary casting and storylines in television, movies, music, books, newspaper stories, radio talk shows, and other forms of popular culture.
And not to patronize sponsors who underwrite such forms of popular culture or companies known to engage in racial discrimination and the perpetuation of racial stereotypes.
I pledge
within my means to support public policy solutions that prominently, openly, and enthusiastically promote racial equality in all aspects of human affairs.
And to actively support and devote my time to the YWCA as well as other organizations working to eradicate racism from our society.